Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into the source code of the human brain to explore a pretty chilling idea that the biggest threats we face might not come from some evil plan, but from a series of, well, predictable glitches in how we all think. So let's start with this really powerful idea from cognitive scientist Yudkowsky. He argues that it's not some supervillain we should be worried about, but a simple, catastrophic mistake, right? That one word, mistake, just raises this huge question. How on earth could all of humanity, with all of our technology and collective brain power, accidentally, wipe ourselves out? It sounds like something out of a movie, but the answer is actually rooted in science. All right, so to figure this out, we're going to follow 5 main clues. What an accidental apocalypse could even look like, what comes to our mind first, the power of a good story, that I knew it all along feeling, and finally, what might be our single biggest blind spot? So what's at the heart of all this? It's not that we're just irrational, it's that we are predictably irrational. See, we all rely on mental shortcuts to get through the day, and those shortcuts, well, they have built-in blind spots. And these shortcuts have a name: heuristics. For thousands of years, they were absolutely brilliant for survival. Making a snap judgment about whether that rustle in the grass was a lion or just the wind. But the problem is, when you take that same gut-level thinking and try to apply it to these huge, modern, global-scale problems, well, that's when those brilliant shortcuts can turn into some really catastrophic bugs. Okay, so our first glitch, it's all about our memory. It's this weird little bug where whatever's easiest to remember feels more likely, more true, even when it's totally not. All right, quick test for you. Trust your gut on this one. Which of these two do you think there are more of? I'm willing to bet most of you went with words that start with R, like run, read, or remember. It's just so much easier to pull those up, right? But you'd actually be wrong. There are way more words like park, car, and farm. We get this wrong because our brain's search function is just way better at finding words by the first letter. And that right there, that's a perfect example of what's called the availability heuristic. So here's the key takeaway. For our brains, easy to remember equals more probable. If an event is vivid and easy to recall, like a plane crash you saw on the news, we think it's way more likely to happen. And you can see how this would totally warp our perception of risk. And this isn't just a fun little brain teaser. It has huge, real-world consequences. Just look at this. Studies show that we wildly overestimate how many people die from dramatic things like accidents. We think it's about the same number as die from disease. But the reality? It's not even close. Diseases are 16 times more deadly. That vivid story, the one that's readily available in our minds, just completely skews our judgment. All right. On to our next glitch. This one shows how our brain's love of a good story can, well, make us pretty bad at statistics. Okay, so let's meet Linda. You get a pretty clear picture of her, right? Now, which of these two statements feels more likely to be true about her? Just go with your gut. So if you picked option 2, you're not alone. A whopping 89% of people do. But here's the thing. Logically, it's impossible. Think about it for a second. The group of all bank tellers has to be bigger than the group of bank tellers who are also feminists because the second group is just a part of the first. A part can never be bigger than the whole. And this little trip up is called the conjunction fallacy. Option 2 just tells a much better story about Linda, a story that fits the description. We basically trade in cold, hard logic for a narrative that just feels right. And when it comes to global risks, a detailed, vivid disaster story can feel way more probable than a vague but statistically more likely threat. Okay, our third glitch messes with how we see the past. It makes us feel like we're geniuses at predicting things that have already happened, which in turn makes us way too confident about what's coming next. Think about the Challenger disaster back in 1986. Looking back now, the cause, those faulty O-rings, it seems so obvious, right? Like, how could they possibly miss it? The warning signs were all there. But at the time, that was just one piece of data among thousands. It's only in hindsight that the path to disaster looks like a straight line. This is a classic case of hindsight bias, that I knew it all along feeling.
It just erases all the randomness and uncertainty from the past and tricks us into thinking the world is a lot more predictable than it really is.
And this hindsight bias, it leads to some serious overconfidence. Get this, in one foundational study, when experts were 98% certain about something, meaning they thought there was almost no way they could be wrong, they were actually wrong over 42% of the time. I mean, that is a massive gap between how sure we feel and what actually happens. Which brings us to our last glitch. And honestly, this might be the most terrifying one of all when we're talking about global risks. Our brain is just really bad with big numbers. So check this out. In a famous study, researchers asked people how much they'd be willing to pay to save migrating birds from oil ponds. Now look at these results. It's kind of stunning. People offered to pay basically the same amount of money whether they were saving 2,000 birds, 20,000 birds, or 200,000 birds. The scale of the problem made almost no difference to their response. And that's scope neglect. What's happening is that our brain conjures up a single image. Maybe one little bird covered in oil. We feel sad about that one bird, and that feeling drives our decision. We don't feel 10 times sadder for 10 birds or 100 times sadder for 100 birds. Our hearts just aren't wired to do that kind of math. Yeah, the Nobel laureate Albert Szent-Györgyi put it perfectly. We can be deeply, deeply moved by the story of one person's suffering, but our hearts just can't multiply that feeling. So the suffering of millions, it just becomes a number. An abstract statistic we can talk about without feeling much at all. So, where does that leave us? Here's the really crucial point from Yudkowsky. Just hearing about all these biases, just knowing they exist, isn't enough to fix them. In fact, it can actually backfire. Because what we tend to do is become experts at seeing these flaws in everybody else while staying totally blind to them in ourselves. And that, right there, is the biggest challenge. We don't just magically get smarter because the stakes are higher. The fact that we're talking about, the survival of humanity doesn't automatically fix these bugs in our thinking. So the real challenge isn't just knowing about the glitches. It's about building systems, building habits of mind that can actually counteract them in ourselves, especially when it really, truly matters.